This is take two. Hello, everyone. It's Tony here from Lokster Reads on day 4 of Remembrance Reads. I read chapters 22 to 25 of Ernest Hemingway's A Farewell to Arms. I've not got much to say about that at this point. I think I might just review that unless there's something really exciting comes up. I might just save the review of that till when I've finished. Then I read part 4 of In Parenthesis, which is another long section. It features possibly the most famous bit of poetry from In Parenthesis, which is the Boast of Greatcoat, which I think is a fantastic piece of writing, but it's packed thick full of like allusions, literary references, historical references, particularly to sort of Welsh history and Welsh literature. But not only that, it's a wonderful piece of writing. I'm not going to quote from it because I would not do it justice. But I will link to, there is a reading of it by Michael Sheen, which he did for the Welsh National Opera, which is a magnificent performance and well worth listening to. So I'll link that below. But listen to that if you get a moment. It's about 8 minutes long, but it's worth listening to. I mean, part 4 starts with so the stand 2, which, as I mentioned yesterday, is sort of as the light was coming up and as the light was going down, in the British trenches, all troops would advance to the firing step and watch and wait, because those were the times generally where most attacks went in, and then they'd stand there for a bit, and then if nothing happened, they'd stand down. So it starts with that, and it talks about the experience of the light and the watching, and then Private Ball takes up the first watch of the day, and you talk through his experiences of that. You talk about the ball, like getting the daily activities on the front line, getting rations, making tea. There's a line in it actually that I will quote, which is, "How do you get hot water in this place of all water, all cold water up to the knees?" Which actually reminded me of Samuel Taylor Coleridge's "Water, water everywhere, and not a drop to drink," from the Rime and the Ancient Mariner. It was a bit, and also we talked about stand 2s and stand downs yesterday a bit, based on Paul Fussell. And he looks, and as he looks around, and he looks at there's a wood across the line other side, which is occupied by the enemy. And he said, and there's a quote from that as well, which I found quite interesting. He found the wood visually so near, yet for the feet forbidden by a great fixed gulf, a sight somehow to have a powerful hold on his mind. To the woods of all the world is this potency, which I thought was a great. To the woods of all the world is this potency. Such a deep shot of a line, because woods, especially ancient woodlands, do have that weird effect on people, and in fact, it reminded me of a book called Mythago Wood, which is a fantasy novel by an author whose name I can't remember, but I will put in the notes below, which is about a patch of ancient woodland in England that is, it's Mythago Wood. So it has strange effects, and actually there's also I think there's a story. I saw a novel recently that came out about a patch of woodland where during the Civil War some troops go in and then never come out, and then the new novel is set in the present day, and things, and a group of people go to explore and to research this. From what I remember, I can't remember what that's called, but that woods do have an effect on people. Then the woods of all the world is this potency, which I think is a great, as I said, I think is a great line. And then the other line that I picked up from this was, "Come with Merlin in his madness, for the pity of it, for all the young men reaped like green barley, for the folly of it." Again, come with Merlin in his madness. I like In Parenthesis as a whole, and I am ripping chunks of it out of context, but he has the great deep cut line, and I think to the woods of all the world is this potency, come with Merlin in his madness, are both lines like that for me, anyway. And basically, it takes you through the day of a very normal day, and what it's like to be on the receiving end of an artillery shell that misses you, but might have hit somebody near you, and does damage the trench. And the description of how a shell pushes, even if it misses, it pushes through the earth, and the vibration, the sound is really well described. I think it's a brilliant. Part 4 is just a brilliant piece of writing all round. And then I read part 3 of Paul Fussell's The Great War, Modern Memory. This one's called Adversary Proceedings, or as he refers to it later, gross dichotomizing, which is really about how there is a division of things during the war, during the Great War, that is passed down and onward through literature to pretty much the present day. So you've got us and them, so the enemy and the allies. You've got what he calls the versus habit, so the division of things into known versus unknown, safe versus hostile. And then he talks about time before and time after. There's a quote he quotes from Owen. That I think is quite. Let me see if I can find it. I should have prepared this, but I haven't got a decent notebook to write things in at the moment, so I've come back to it. Anyway, I'll find it. But there's a quote about Wilfred Owen and how just before he gets involved in the fighting, he writes a letter to his mum saying how great things are and how wonderful it is, and then immediately he writes back and goes afterwards, when he's experienced war as it is fought, his whole attitude changes. And in this chapter, he uses Siegfried Sassoon as a specific example, again, of how attitudes divide and how his own work has that division in it. He also talks about officers versus men, even field officers versus staff officers, the home front versus the front, which reminded me of an article. Again, I'll put a link in the notes because I can't remember the writer's name, but it was an essay that I read called Combat Gnosticism, that talks about the way that the only valid literature from World War One seems to be that written by men who fought on the front line, and that they are the only people that could understand what happened, and that nothing else really counts. And it sort of deals with that issue. I recommend the essay if you can find it. But as I said, I'll put a link in the notes. And then, as I said, he talks about Siegfried Sassoon as a specific example. And that's actually quite a good introduction to Siegfried Sassoon in general. If you don't know anything about him, you don't know much about his writing, it's a really good introduction. I don't always agree with Paul Fussell's approach. I think he intentionally or unintentionally limits himself to a certain group of people as his examples of how the literary responses to World War One were. There's not much from Australians, New Zealanders, Canadians, Indians, Germans, French people. So it's a very specifically English, specifically not entirely officer, but officer class view of World War One. And I think people have probably, this book came out in the 80s, I think. So people have probably there are probably responses to it that I should read that take on some of the things. But I do think he's the basic things that he's right about the World War One themes that became ongoing responses as time passed, and how we look through those lenses at World War One rather than through a proper, like a direct historical link. The book about the death sentences handed out to British soldiers, the title of which again has escaped me, makes a few digs at that view of the war in the first chapter. So I'm intrigued to see where that goes. And then I read 2 short stories. I read Arthur Machen's Machen's. Do you know what? I really should look up these pronunciations before I do these videos, because I get annoyed when other people can't be bothered to pronounce names right, because I think it's a sort of sign of disrespect, particularly when it's a foreign name. I am trying to get a proper pronunciation for the Gododin, which I'm going to call the Gododin for now until I get a proper pronunciation of it. But yeah, so Mr. Arthur, the Bowman, which is, you probably know that story. It's the one about basically British troops on the retreat of Mons are making a sort of last stand. There's only about 500 of them left, and apparently there were millions of Germans marching towards them. But out of a cry from a soldier come Bowman from Agincourt firing, darkening the sky with their arrows and driving off the Germans. It sort of became, I think this short story is the reason some people think it actually happened, which it obviously didn't. But it does make me want to know more about the retreat from Mons, because it was some kind of, it was a defeat for the British, but it was a fighting defeat, and maybe you could call it a Pyrrhic victory for the Germans. And then I read The Gardener by Rudyard Kipling. Now, the only other thing by Rudyard Kipling I've ever read, well, I think I read the Just So stories when I was a kid, but I don't really remember much about them. But I read Kim, which I do actually really like. I first actually came across it on an audio cassette read by Art Malik, which was beautifully read. And yes, it's a colonial, infused with colonialism, but I still think it's a very good book. The Gardener is a beautiful short story about a woman visiting a grave of somebody she brought up as her own child, even though he probably wasn't. And when they find the grave, there's a gardener there who may be more than a gardener. And the ending is really beautiful. It's a very beautiful short story. It's very moving. I really recommend it if you can get your hands on it. Actually, it should be easy to get your hands on because it's in a lot of Kipling short story collections. So that's what I read today for Remembrance Reads. A slightly more varied selection than yesterday. I hope these daily updates are of interest. Please like, subscribe, comment. I'll put my Ko-Fi account in, so if you want to buy me a coffee, that'd be great. And we plod on. I'm enjoying everything I'm reading at the moment. The Hemingway is interesting. I'm still sort of making my way through that I'm not quite sure how much I like this book way. But I think there's no point talking about it until I finish it entirely. I'm nowhere near disliking it, but I'm nowhere near loving it either. So we shall see. So there you go. That's day 4 of Remembrance Reads, and we'll catch up again tomorrow if I remember to do this. All right, bye.